Task 13 is accuracy, but off the opposite shoulder that you're used to. This one requires a little bit of work, and a couple of things you want to do is, number one, I always change my tape because you don't want that fly bouncing into itself, and I'm not going to do that today. I'll try to compensate because the camera angle is good from here, and we've got a wind that's almost directly behind me. But if that wind's coming into this shoulder like we talked about, I would just turn. I usually move my tape about 70 degrees to the right and set up my cones, and that way the wind will be blowing my loop away from itself, but not so drastically that it's a hard time laterally hitting your cones. The other thing I do is you're going to have to decide how you want to deal with this. A lot of people, if I'm looking at you, you may want to do this to hit your accuracy. I don't do that on short distances for this test. I do this for this test right here. Make sure that rod is over this shoulder. If you've got your rod right here, you're going to have that's a little bit shaky. You want to have the rod over on this shoulder, pretty, distinctly on this shoulder. And then you're going to go back and forth. For this one, I use the thumb on top grip because this one just feels weird to me I've got to turn my arm up too high. But you've got to play with whatever grip you want, and you may have an examiner. I doubt if any examiner is going to care, but you may have a mentor who's going to make some suggestions. Listen to them and try it. If it doesn't work their way, try it my way. If it doesn't work my way, try their way. The other thing I'm going to do, look at my feet. You can't see it very far, but I'm about maybe 3 feet from this cone, just perfectly laterally outside of the cone, and I've still got my right leg forward. So what I want to do here is, the reason I set this up is because I want my rod tip to go back and forth across that, just back down that line. I want to play like there's a wall, straight up from that tape and straight in the back. Big wall, and I'm going to bring my rod tip right along that wall, right here. Now, if I've got my rod this far off, look at my tip. I've got a vertical rod sticking out of my head. You can see that the tip of this rod is 3 feet from the tip of that rod. So if I'm going to have my rod go back and forth here, I need to move that far, and I want it parallel to the tape. I need to move that far off the tape. So I'm just going to move it right to here, and now this is the position I'm going to be in right here. Other than that, everything's pretty much the same. You're going to practice it the same. The only thing I would suggest is you're going to have to spend a lot of time on loops. So practice your 20-foot loop. Just put it at 20 feet. Don't worry about the whole accuracy thing. Just stick it at 20 feet. Now, look at my rod placement. I've got the same exact rod placement I had on the opposite shoulder. It's stopping at about 11:30 and going to 10. Same exact rod placement, and you're going to see a very similar loop. At 30 feet, same thing, pick up. Pick it up here. Move your trajectory a little bit to be more appropriate for 30 feet, then feed it. Now practice 30-foot loops. Wind's hitting my yarn a little bit because I'm not turned. Same thing with 45. Just throw it out to 45. So now it's at 45. Practice 45-foot loops, making sure they're thin. Remember, you're only going back to 1 o'clock here because you've got a slightly downward trajectory. So I'm going to practice 45-foot loops. Then I'll practice hitting a target. But my point is, you need to practice. Every day you need to practice those off-shoulder loops. And by the way, I think transitioning from 30 to 45 feet is one of the hardest things on the entire task. You're going to go from 30, nice pickups. I'm going to have to turn just a little bit. You're going to go from 30 with nice pickups. Now you're going to have to transition to 45. 1, 2, 3. Practice that transition. There you go. So task 13 is not a whole lot different than task 12 except for the off-shoulder aspect, where you stand and the angle of your rod. Now I have my back to you, and we're going to demonstrate that. You can see my rod tip is off to the left. My rod is going back and forth on this wall, and that keeps me being pretty accurate. And then all I'm working at is good loops, setting it down. I might put my feet like this. And I use, like I said, the thumb on top grip here. Everything else remains the same. So now you're going to have to practice 45-foot loops. Don't worry about everything, just practice 45-foot loops because you're going to have to make a bunch of them if you want to pass this exam. You don't have to worry too much about your pickup again because it's not important. But you're just going to pick it up. Practice those loops. And then practice hitting the target. Okay, hit it. Just practice those loops. Now practice hitting the target. A little bit off to the right. Just about a foot to the left, still well within the task. I spend as much time thinking about my loops as I do about that. Extending from 30 to 45 feet is probably one of the hardest things to do. You've got it at 30 and you've got to go to 45 off shoulder. Practice is good pickup. It's not going to be as good as the other one maybe, but it still should be pretty good. Right there. Practice that just over and over again. I'm hooking some grass down there. So just practice it. Once you've got it done and you got a pretty decent loop, in other words, you don't want this. Nice loop pickup. Extend. 1, 2, 3. And then shoot. So extending from 30 feet to 45 is pretty hard. Good pickup. Nice loops at 30 with the 30-foot trajectory. Now extend. Make sure first though you get your, I've changed my trajectory a little bit. Got to extend 3 times. 1, 2. That was 3. Now good loops. Aim for your target. Just hit it right on the button. So those are all things you do one at a time, do a lot of times. I seldom, if ever, until I'm completely done with all these little pieces, do I try to put it all together. You put it all together after you've done all the little pieces, after you've done 30 to 45, 40 times. Really, really, really work at your loops. I can't tell you how important that is. You got to look at your loops so you don't really have to think about the targets. And if you do all this right, your accuracy is going to be more consistent because your loops are more consistent. Therefore, you're going to hit the target more often because you have exactly the same kind of a loop every single time.